You are listening to Disrupt Your Data, the data leadership podcast for business leaders. Stop talking about it. Start having an impact with data. That's the mantra we have. Whether you're an executive, leading a department, or a functional team, benefit from best practices from overperforming companies and avoid stepping into classic pitfalls. This podcast is targeted at business leaders who want to grow faster and create real impact with data analytics and AI. I am Chris Lubasch, and today we're going to talk about building a single source of truth. That's a term coined in the world of business intelligence that has the idea to bring all data together with all analysis possible in one single place and system. It's also the opposite of the situation that lots of companies still face, having data silos all over the place that limits their ability to connect and integrate data for holistic decisions. We talk about what a single source of truth means, what's the idea behind it, how to make it happen, and honestly, whether that idea is even realistic to achieve. My guest is a strong supporter for the idea paired with self-service analytics for everybody in the company.
People can often use data to make their own arguments, and they'll kind of modify it to fit a particular agenda that they have. And if you have a single source of truth, you're looking at the metrics and dimensions in exactly the same way, then there's less ability to have different narratives. Because the whole point of data is that everybody gets on the same page, it's objective, and then you can align on decisions. One thing can be a huge culture shift, right? You can have an organization where its decisions are very much based on hierarchy. When you really are making decisions based on data, it brings departments together. Don't settle. You should be able to explore your data easily. Instead of every single question, you have business people coming to you and saying, hey, answer this, that they can just explore it on their own.
The more data silos you break up, the better it is. More connected data sets give you insights that you didn't have before. Not even speaking of some other advantages like having matching numbers because everybody's using the same system and not 25 different ones. I guess we've all been there. You ask 5 people to do a similar analysis and they bring 4 different results. Often because data for these analyses didn't even match before the analysis was started. And unsurprisingly, this whole idea doesn't scale very much. But is a single source of truth really the solution to all of this? Let's see what we find out. My next guest is a strong believer in data democratization, a senior executive at a fast-growing global startup in the field of data and analytics with a truly international background. He is VP EMEA at Fivetran, a software putting your data integration efforts at autopilot. I'm happy to have him on the podcast today. Please welcome Nate Spohn. Hey Nate, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Delighted to be here with you.
Wonderful. Thanks for making it happen. I'm very grateful that you're on board and looking forward to our chat today. I think we got a really cool, interesting topic.
Yeah, no, I would agree. We've had some good chats in the past, so very excited for this one.
Cool. Hey, before we jump into the topic straight away, let us talk a bit about your background, okay? You're Canadian, but you made the jump to the entrepreneurial dream. That's at least how I see what you've told me. And you ended up in San Francisco, which is, let's say, the city of the dreams of most people that want to jump into entrepreneurship. And I would be very interested in how did that happen? Why did you end up there and what did you do there?
Yeah, so I'm from a really small town up in Canada, and but I wanted something more exciting. So I took my grandma's old beat up car, drove down into the big city, got a job at a 3D printing company that paid me very little money. Actually lived on a sailboat to save money, a sailboat I wasn't supposed to live on. But then eventually made connections and landed as the 7th employee in Fivetran. And that kind of was, if you get on the right elevator, things go up from there. So it's pretty exciting.
Wow, that sounds very much like a classic startup story. Just the garage is missing that we often hear about. So you really slept on the boat? Yeah. That's how it all started?
Yeah. Rents are crazy in San Francisco. And I had always loved boats. So I bought this kind of old slightly falling apart boat from 1969. And that's how
Wow.
that's how I got into the Bay.
Oh, very, very cool. Very impressive. I'm really looking forward to see where the story will go to. Hey, and then after your time in San Francisco, you moved over to Europe, right? How did that happen? What did you make to, to want to cross the ocean?
Right. So in San Francisco, I met my girlfriend at the time, now wife, who's Spanish. And about 2 months after we got together, she said, this can be a thing, but we're going to have to move to Europe. So we made a deal. She gets to pick the continent, I get to pick the country. And then her visa was denied to stay in the US. So we used it as a
Ooh,
forcing function, and we came over to Europe when we were only 30 people in Fivetran. So really early for a company like ours.
okay. Well, hey, before we jump into the topic, my last question would be about now that you know both sides of the ocean, what's a big difference or what's your favorite thing about the culture, the work or the private culture in the US compared to Europe now?
Yeah. I think American startup culture is great for just going for it, being bold, and just making things happen, being ultra solution orientated. European culture is very consensus driven a lot of the time. You get opinions from a lot of different people. And I think when you marry those two things together, you really listen to everybody, but you also are confident in making decisions. It's a really nice combination, and you can build a pretty solid organization using those two mindsets.
Cool. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Hey, great. Then looking forward to see what's your take on the topic and the EMEA operations of Fivetran, which we'll also talk about later in a bit. Hey, our main topic today is building a single source of truth. And the main idea behind that is bringing all data together that is relevant. I mean, not necessarily everything that you can find across the whole organization, but everything that is relevant, which is of course a little bit different per company and per use case maybe even, and then make a consolidation of that data and turn that into something which is, as the name suggests, the single source of truth for all your analysis efforts and for everything that you're basically doing with data. And if you spice it up even, which is also a topic that we'll cover today with self-service analytics or data democratization, then this gives you a very powerful tool to have all your data at one place and everybody can access it at one place and no need to look in 25 different tools or such. And I think that's great. And let's start with the question, why is that so important to you? Because it was a suggestion that you also brought up for the topic. Why is that important to you?
Yeah, so I think there are two reasons why a single source of truth is important. First of all, people can often use data to make their own arguments, and they'll kind of modify it to fit a particular agenda that they have. And if you have a single source of truth, you're looking at the metrics and dimensions in exactly the same way, then there's less ability to have different narratives. Because the whole point of data is that everybody gets on the same page, it's objective, and then you can align on decisions. But the other thing that I think is really important is that if you've clearly defined a lot of the key metrics in your organization, it really empowers so many people to then ask questions of those metrics. And if the way that it's defined is consistent and people know what these metrics are, then they're much more able to really explore the data and ask questions and get curious and help the organization be more data driven.
Very cool summary. I think that makes all the sense in the world. It's a nice intro to the topic as well. Hey, and what is the business impact of doing that? What is the benefit that companies gain when they, let's say, follow this kind of advice?
So I think one thing can be a huge culture shift, right? You can have an organization where its decisions are very much based on hierarchy. They're very much based on, political alliances within an organization. You can have rifts between departments. When you really are making decisions based on data, it brings departments together. It's no longer about whose opinion is right. It's about how can we solve this very apparent issue that we can see in the data. The other thing is, it's kind of non-negotiable for companies these days to be data-driven. We have these huge shifts that happen in our market, and if we're not able to look at data and progress and get curious, we're kind of driving blind to a large extent.
Yeah, I unfortunately agree. There's still a lot of companies who are going on the very much gut-driven way as the way of doing it. Is that something that is easy to achieve for companies out there? Or what is the challenge of making this happen, so to say? And do you see a difference maybe between smaller companies and larger companies like enterprises or so in following down that route?
Yeah, I think large enterprises, they may have an advantage in that they have infrastructure already in place, but more than likely it's legacy infrastructure that has a lot of limitations and is incredibly manual and time intensive to get insights. And so you could very well have an opinion that this is just super hard and you're, kind of settle for only getting a few reports and pretty limited insight into your data. Whereas a lot of the newer companies, they can start from scratch. And so they can use a lot of these powerful cloud-based tools to get really good data stacks built incredibly quickly. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but there can be an advantage to doing it from scratch sometimes, yeah.
And would you say that legacy architecture that is in place at some larger companies, that makes it more difficult?
I think so. Like traditionally, compute power of on-premise data warehouses was more limited or needed a lot more work in order to manage it than cloud-based data warehouses. And then a lot of the infrastructure to integrate data into those warehouses would have been incredibly manual. A lot of the BI tools maybe as well. And so that means that there's, if you have a water flow workflow where you have to spend a lot of time defining exactly what report you need and then a lot of time integrating and preparing that data to have the report, and there's a 2-month delay or a 2-week delay even to getting a report, you're going to be a lot less inquisitive. You're going to ask much fewer questions just because, you can't get the result in a couple of minutes, which is, I think, a lot what our millennial generation expects and is used to.
Yeah, I agree. I still remember when I started my career at SAP, large software vendor, and I was working in the BI field, and I pressed the button to run a report on revenue for a specific product category on I think also EMEA level or something. And it really took like minutes and minutes. And I went down to get a coffee and, I even drank it before the result was there. And that's also something that thankfully, due to large advances in technology, that we have seen changing away to some degree, as you say. Hey, yeah. And maybe adding from our own experiences in the field of data consulting here, we see that this is a topic that is super interesting to many companies, but yet at the same time, it's also much more difficult than what it sounds like. Because there's usually a tons of different data sets available in a company. They're super disparate. They are siloed. They're not well connected, and often they're not even well maintained. If you ask the owner of a tool, you sometimes don't even get an answer about the quality to expect in such a data source. And even if you manage to do all the integration, let's say, make it a little bit simplifying and say to get it all at one central physical location from all the silos to one single place. It's also something we're going to talk about later. Once you have done that, the biggest, I would say, part of such projects usually is really combining all the data together, making sense of it together, consolidating it. We call this data modeling because it's the idea to bring in all the business logics and everything that you want to see in a sort of final data model before you expose it to dashboards and reports, which is kind of the only thing that business users usually see, which also makes it very complex to run these projects in an organization because the only thing that business stakeholders and often project sponsors from the non-technical side see is the final outcome in terms of the dashboard or the report. And nothing of all the rest, of all the technology that was used and all the work that has been done is really very much visible. And that is a big problem that we often saw. Nate, is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to have a good data model and to centralize the data. I think there are tools that make it easier than it used to be. That isn't saying it's easy. We're from this sort of utopia of anyone in an organization being able to ask any question of data, getting the answer. We're not there yet, and I think that the collaboration between business users and analysts or people doing BI is really important, so that the model so that the people building the model understand what's really important to have in that model and that will be relevant to business users later on. Yeah, it's not easy, but I think it is very doable.
Do you think the communication between these business stakeholders and the data people is something that companies need to improve on?
I would say yes, always. Like it's going to depend, right? Certain BI departments are going to have a good understanding of the business already, and really work with their business stakeholders. And then others might not. They might think, hey, I'm an analyst. I don't need to understand the business or what these metrics do. Just give me a list of requirements. And I really believe that it's a collaboration if you want to build something really useful.
And speaking about collaboration and democratization of data, that's something you're really after. Can you explain what is your, let's say, best practice way of exposing data and giving it access to a lot of people in the organization?
Yeah, so I'm personally, a lot involved in a lot of BI projects, but also a business user of data myself. And what I love is if there's like a well-built dashboard that gives a lot of key metrics that we're looking at, what's super important to me is that that dashboard is explorable and that it's built with the intention of it kind of being an entranceway into a whole world of exploration of all sorts of different questions. And so in order to do that, you need these single sources of truth, right? You need to define all of the dimensions, but you need to be able to kind of look at different time scales, add in other dimensions, and kind of explore all of the elements of the dashboard. So dashboards that are locked down and that don't have a lot of ability to filter or explore, to me, they're really missing the point, and they're a lot more limited and providing a lot less value than they could.
Yeah, totally with you on that. And I think even if we step a little bit, or even if we step back a little bit, I think there's still a lot of critics who say that, there's a data team for a reason, and they should have access to the best tooling and the best reports and the best model and so on and so on. And at the same time, of course, management needs these tools to do better decisions. And I think, yeah, that's all true. And there's always a reason why we have such a team in place. But at the same time, I think the model has been proven wrong to assume that giving access to only a few individuals, even if it's a high-ranking ones in hierarchy or whatever, it's wrong. I really believe, as you said, that giving access to everybody is what makes a culture change over time. It's a marathon, unfortunately, not a sprint. But if you limit the cool use cases that you can do with data, if you limit the access to all the analytics and so on to only a few selected people, I think you will really miss a lot of potential and a lot of value from this. So, Nate, now that we talked a bit about the, let's say, overall idea of a single source of truth and why it's important and why it makes a lot of sense to give a lot of people access to that single source of truth, let's talk a little bit about Fivetran. So, from what I have seen in the market and also from our chats, and maybe that's a good moment to do a small disclaimer. So both of our companies do partner, but this interview here is by no means sponsored or promoted or whatever. It's just us talking because we love the topic, and there's no paid promotion or anything going on here, okay? I think that's always a bit important to make sure that this is not sponsored. It's both of our opinions that is hopefully of value to the audience. But talking about Fivetran here, can you tell us a little bit about where Fivetran is coming from? What's the idea behind, and maybe also what makes it special?
Yeah. So I think, we're probably all aware that data warehouses used to be on-prem, and then there's been this huge revolution with cloud-based data warehouses like Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks, where they're much more scalable. They require way less maintenance. You can do whatever workloads you want. And I think that this has also allowed for a complete change in the architecture of data integration tools. So historically, these were tools that you would use to build a data pipeline yourself. They'd be very manual. You constantly have to maintain them. And what we've done, similar to data warehouses, is just created a data pipeline that you don't have to build. It just works. It's fully automated, and it's got 99.99% uptime, so it's very reliable. And the idea is that you get you get the data copied over, and you can control what data you bring over. You can limit or obscure sensitive data, but you get these data sets that in a large part are analytics ready or much more cleaned up, especially if we're pulling data from APIs. We deliver really clean, well-organized data. And we're really trying to eliminate the manual work from that side of the process. So you can just focus on doing analytics, building out your data model, and you don't need to spend all of that time on the ingestion, which historically has been a huge time-consuming effort for a lot of people that really just want to get going with the insights.
Absolutely. It's a super, let's say, time-consuming and also complex way if you're doing it right. It's super easy to get data from A to B once. It's maybe also easy to get it once per day. But that's really, it's not even the tip of the iceberg when it comes to data integration sort of things, right? We haven't talked about things like slowly changing dimensions. We haven't talked about APIs that constantly change, which is also very annoying, by the way. We haven't talked about a lot of other things. So I totally get your point here. So would you say that in my intro, when I said it turns your data integration onto autopilot, that's kind of true?
It's very much true. And it's not easy to do it. Like, you're totally right. The main value that we provide is APIs are really fickle. The logging systems of databases that we read to replicate the data, they're also really fickle. So there's always going to be data inaccuracies. There's always going to be discrepancies, data that you can't get easily if you just build a simple integration. You're totally right. It's easy to build a simple integration. But if you really want to rely on that data, have it constant, like 100% accurate, working, that's what we do behind the scenes. And there's a huge amount of work to make that happen. But that's where we focus on.
And since it's so easy to get it started, but super extremely hard to master this topic, I think that's also the reason why a lot of companies try to do it on their own. It's like, I would say 80% of our clients have tried to do the data integration things on their own before, and they build Python scripts or something to just get the data out, and then they connect it to the API. They said, yeah, no problem. There's a plugin or there's an API connector already written in the language of choice of mine. So it's easy, right? But then suddenly that API connector is not maintained anymore. You never have really fully understand what it's doing. You need to custom adapt it, and you will end up in a totally senseless mess of reinventing the wheel just to connect the data source that a lot of softwares out there in the market can give you sometimes even for free. So I'm wondering, Nate, when Fivetran started a few years ago, that whole idea wasn't new. I mean, essentially, data integration and BI in general, that's a topic from the 80s of last century, which is kind of weird if we talk about it like this, but it has been there for a long while. Of course, everything has changed on the technology side and so on, right? But the idea of getting data from A to B, simply saying, is not new. What does Fivetran do different that it even was worth starting a company in that field?
So when we started, like, our first customer was a company that just needed to get their sales force into Redshift. And there really is no other company out there that can just fully automate the process. Like, you set it up once, you forget about it. All the traditional tools are tools for building your own pipeline. Like, you have to map over the tables, the columns, any issue that comes up with the API, you have to go in and fix yourself. So it's a tool for building a data pipeline. It's not actually in itself a data pipeline. Now, there are other tools in the market now that are kind of similar in approach, in that you just kind of connect it and it brings over the data. But really, our competitive advantage is that we've spent years and huge amount of engineering resources in ensuring that those data integrations are 100% reliable, that bring over absolutely all the data that's available. And so companies that care about the reliability, the data integrity, the completeness of data, so that they can really explore whatever questions they want, we have a bit of a moat around us from a technology standpoint, just because we've done the hard work over years of ensuring that every single integration that we support is as highest quality as it can be.
Raises the question, do you see that your customers can live with the fact that, I mean, I guess they can live with the fact that you're doing the hard work, but can they live with the fact that they have to give the control up over their pipeline to a certain degree, at least when it comes to data integration to an outside provider?
Yeah, well, that's a cultural thing, right? There are some people that are used to controlling the preload data, like before it comes into your data warehouse and controlling that heavily. But our philosophy is that you'll be much more agile in your analytics if you're doing any modeling post-load once the data is already in the warehouse, because then you have a complete copy. So you can just change how you're querying the data if you need a different, if you need new data, versus having to go back and spend 2 months integrating in a new data source or changing how you're integrating the data source. So it's not that you can't have control. It's just that you would do that once the data is loaded into the data warehouse. And because storage is almost free, that's possible, where it simply wasn't possible historically.
Yeah, good point to make that comparison. And what are the kind of data sources that your customers typically integrate? I mean, I know, for example, for marketing, there's a ton of APIs that you usually need to connect to because your marketing is spread across a lot of different tools and partners and channels and so on. But what are, overall speaking, the sources that you see connected most often?
Yeah. So we've really taken the approach of wanting to support companies and having a holistic view of their most important data. So we don't have just marketing connectors or just a particular just databases. We do have a broad selection of the most popular ones. So, you know, Salesforce is huge, Marketo is huge, databases like Postgres, SQL Server, Oracle are really popular. All of the ad, social media stuff is popular, but then also things like Jira for your engineering teams or Workday for HR. So we really do have a pretty solid set of the most common connectors. And then getting into the long tail is what's taking us, you know, we're kind of slowly marching towards the longer tail of data sources.
And do you sometimes see your customers not wanting to reveal their super internal, high confidential data? I mean, I get that sharing or getting data from a tool in the marketing world is maybe a different story than exposing your entire customer database that you have internally, especially on the corporate side or in some industries like banking and finance, to an external provider to get the data into the warehouse. Is that something you realize?
Yeah, so security is fundamental, right, to a lot of companies that we support, and it's actually becoming a real strength for us. So, for instance, in Europe or in Germany, we have a data center out of Frankfurt. For the UK, we have one out of London. We're also we're just incorporating in Germany, so we have a legal entity here as well, which helps with security. And then we have a lot of really good controls for companies to be able to limit the data that goes through Fivetran, or to obscure data so that it's, you know, it's hashed or obfuscated when it's in the warehouse. So we're getting to the place where security is a real strength for us, but it's taken a consistent focus on this and really prioritizing it.
Cool. Yeah, that's good to hear. It's not, I'm a strong believer that privacy by design is super important. And I understand that it does not help our everyday jobs, let's say, working in that industry. I mean, I've been working with data for the last 14 years. And of course, the GDPR and such regulations doesn't make my personal job easier, let's say, but it still doesn't make it wrong. So I think privacy, security, and other topics around are super, super important. It's very good to see that vendors are catching up on that. Not only to close the sales, but they do understand that's there in the long run. It's not to go away. And I think other countries will also follow down that route. So that makes a lot of sense, Nate. Hey, let us go even a little bit deeper on the single source of truth again. I think it's good, before we jump in deeper, to just give a little bit overview of what it is before we continue. Let me share my view, and then please jump in if you see that differently.
Sounds great.
If you agree, okay?
Yeah.
Cool. So typically speaking, there's 3 parts of such a system. One of the ideas is that business users typically ask rather structured questions. From the business perspective of how much revenue did I do last month via this particular sales or marketing channel, or what's the contribution margin on XYZ product category, these kind of things, that's very structured. It does contain a lot of logics that are sometimes very specific to a given company, but in the end of the day, it's structured. And once it's defined, you can pretty much well bake it into the system, so to say. But to do so, What you will start doing typically, other than setting up the infrastructure and architecture, of course, which is very often cloud-based these days, you will do the data integration part. And I think this is what we just covered with Fivetran. It's, if you want to super oversimplify it, it's getting the data from A to B in a very reliable way. But again, in reality, there's much more to it. And let us try to understand that from a metaphor perspective of talking about food. So when we have data silos all over the company, and we can see them as ingredients for a dinner or for just simply any meal that we want to cook. It's like every data source is sort of an ingredient to our final meal. And when we do the integration now, it's basically like going on grocery shopping. So getting all that in your bags and carrying it home so you can cook it. Without doing that step, and I think that's pretty logical, you just simply can't cook it. And you can't do any holistic analysis in the data world without getting the data together. Next, as briefly outlined before, when you do have it all at one central place, what you really want to do is connect it, to consolidate it, to model it, to give it a meaning. It's getting all your business logics baked into this. How do you define a new customer, for example? It's a classic example in, let's say, in e-commerce, for instance. Is a new customer somebody who has never purchased before? Yeah, probably. But what if the client, or the customer in this case, has not purchased for 2 years? There's a lot of companies who say that's, again, sort of a new customer to me because I need to convince that customer again to purchase. And there's no value in having that record in my database unless that person is somewhat active. So that's a business decision that you want to do. And that's just one simple example of a ton of others that you deal with when you do the modeling. And the end result of this modeling will be something we call, unsurprisingly, data model. And there's certain technical ways to differentiate that for marketing, for finance, and for other stakeholders and so on. But at the end of the day, you can just imagine it's a data model that comes out of it. And that's like the cooking. It's like mixing all the ingredients up, but you need to do it at the right order and with the right, let's say, consumption. So you don't want to add too much salt to it, for example, because it's getting salty. It's very easy to understand that from a metaphorical perspective. It's not so easy to understand that from a pure data perspective, but believe me, it's kind of like this. And lastly, when we talk about the data model that's now in place, how do we get access to it? Yeah, how do we give it to business users? Because until then, it's pretty much done by data teams usually. But how do we get the insights out of it to make better decisions as a company? That's why we are doing all of this, right? And that's the point where the reports or the dashboarding comes basically on top as the third layer. The key point now is that ideally you don't misuse the BI tools for all the modeling, but you really try to use them for what they have been built for, let's say reporting, dashboarding and such. They do support you in modeling and some do very well, like for example, Looker. But at the end of the day, just be aware that because you're using such a tool, you still have to do all the steps before you still have to do the modeling first. And to wrap that up in our metaphor of cooking, that is essentially when the dinner, let's say, is served. So it's cooked, the meal is cooked, and then I get it for eating. The problem with this metaphor and the final cooked meal is that when we talk about self-service analytics or data democratization, basically giving everybody in the company access to data, then pre-built reports, or sometimes even the logged reports, as Nate called them, won't do the trick. Because you can understand and know what question was asked yesterday and build a report for that. But what you can't do is predict all the upcoming questions and all the variations that people will have for this. So what you want to do is get some flexibility in it. And we'll talk about that in 2 minutes. But my key point is here, in terms of the metaphor, think of it like a buffet restaurant, an all-you-can-eat restaurant or something. You can choose whatever you want and put it on your own dish and eat it. But the pieces are prepared by the chef. So you don't have to start from scratch and do all the cooking on your own if you go to a restaurant, of course. But at the same time, you can still choose what you really want to eat today. And I think this is maybe a stretch too far from a metaphor perspective, but it's really a good way of at least understanding that what you want to give people is the freedom and the flexibility to choose how to answer their particular business questions, because you simply can't know them. You will never be a good marketer as the marketing people. And if you work in a data team, for example, you won't know finance better than the finance people, right? So it's a better idea to give them access to the data and let them help themselves. But of course, be there for the real, let's say, hard work stuff for the real complex analysis, and of course not even speaking about running the architecture and the infrastructure and so on and so on. So Nate, when I wrap this up in terms of these 3 layers, is that something that you tend to see as well? Is that a way to think about it from your perspective too?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love the metaphor. It's just fundamental. And it's funny to think about a world where you don't have pre-prepared food, where you have got to go out and, hunt the chicken yourself and butcher it yourself. Like, you're not going to get very far. Yeah, dinner is not going to be served for a long, long time. So, I think that that's just fundamental to being a data-driven organization. And it's really exciting. Like, once you've done the work to define that model, it's almost like a fridge with all sorts of great stuff in it. And you can just go there anytime and grab what you need, combine what you need. And then, that's where you get all the incredible dishes that come in the end. So yeah, I love the metaphor.
How realistic is it to build such a single source of truth? When we understand the idea, we understand the metaphor, and let's not forget what we call single source of truth is kind of what people have called business intelligence for a long while now. And by saying single source of truth, what we essentially mean is not only the technological happenings, but it's really that people have only one particular system to look at. If I want to report on anything, if I want to do analysis on anything, that's my first and main point of contact. Doesn't mean that there's no other systems anymore ever in the company, but that's my main point of contact for almost everything that I want to analyze. That's the idea of behind the single source of truth, right? And now I'm wondering, how realistic do you think this is to build? And does that matter if it's a startup or a mid-sized company or a large enterprise from your experience? How realistic is it to have that single source thing in the end?
So first of all, it's never going to be perfect, but it can get good quickly, and it's
right, that's a typical startup thing, huh?
Sounds good. No, it can get useful quickly, and I think it's going to be more accessible, or it's going to be easier to do it for a smaller organization. You've got less departments, you've got simpler data sets. It's easier to get people aligned across what they're looking for. For larger companies, it will be more challenging, and it may be that you need to kind of get a core set of a core data model that's maybe fewer ingredients, or just kind of a key set of ingredients that the whole organization can access. But then if you have really large other departments, you may need to go in and look at those individual departments on their own. The more that you can integrate the really fundamental things across the organization, I think you'll get big benefit. But you don't want to end up in a world where there's a small team owning the data model, and there are people that aren't being served by that data model and don't have access to data and can't answer questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about that in a little more detail, what are the key things that companies need to get right from your experience to make that thing happen?
I think there needs to be a dialogue between the business users and the analysts or the BI team to really pick what are the key aspects of a data model. And it's not that complicated. There are fundamental things that you look at, like revenue, or how do you define a customer, or a stage 1 opportunity. So it shouldn't be that hard. You just want to make sure that you're really answering the core fundamental questions, and then from those questions you can really look at the data on all sorts of different dimensions. So you want to be able to filter by time or to segment really effectively. So it's kind of like you need to get these key pillars or these key fundamental ingredients right, and then the rest is a lot simpler from there.
And does Fivetran help companies that use your software to do that, or do you just provide the tooling and they are on their own?
Yeah, so we when we pull data from an API, for instance, the data that you get out of an API is incredibly messy often and very hard to make sense of. And we do a ton of work to deliver a well-designed intentional schema where the data is laid out very logically. That being said, the work that goes from that and having all these individual data sources to actually building a data model That's not what we specialize in, right? So, consultancies such as yourself add massive value. We are building sort of some pre-built models that you can put on top of data sources to answer particular questions. But you really do need a skilled team to pick up the data and go the rest of the way to provide a good data model for your company.
And do you also see clients from let's say from the functional teams? I mean, I do understand that data teams come out and reach out to Fivetran and using the tool, but do you also have people, let's say from the marketing team, coming up to you and wondering how they can help themselves with your solution because you're automating that part? Which I guess they could never build on their own because they're not technical skilled programmers or such usually. Yeah,
we see that sometimes, but traditionally we've really worked more with data teams and data engineers, BI teams. The value, though, that business users get is very real from our service. Like, if you don't have access to the data that you need to answer the questions, that's a huge business impediment. But I think the collaboration between the key business stakeholders who run marketing or sales and their BI team is important to set up that infrastructure. Because we're one part of a modern data stack, right? Where you have a warehouse, you have a BI tool, and it does take a level of expertise to make sure all those systems are working together effectively.
Great, Nate. Thanks a lot for that explanation. I think I would like to add one thing from my experience here when it comes to the question if it's realistic to add or to build such a single source of truth or not. And I think it very much depends on the question what realistic means. Yeah. So for somewhat smaller companies, I think it's totally realistic. We've done it many times in the past, and there's no reason why it shouldn't work out. For larger organizations, and we can debate another time what exactly larger means here, but let's take an example for corporate, for instance. I do not believe it's realistic to build a single source of truth in the end of the day. And why is that? Because there's too much data silos lying around. There's too much logics. There's too much people involved in all of this. Ton of different systems, some of them being very legacy, not even providing the kind of data that you need. Data comes at all different sorts of formats. That's probably the easiest part about it. It's coming at different intervals, so the freshness is different. There's different data sets available or different qualities available in the data sets, and so on and so on and so on. And it's also the question if it's something you really want to desire, if it's something to say, okay, in a large organization, it's even logically making sense or realistic to have such a central source of truth that is covering everything that the organization does, because you can't logically combine every single data source with each other, right? Some data sets just simply have no relation to each other, and it's okay. That's how it is in the real world, right? What I do see, though, is that a lot of companies have started to work towards such a system. And a lot of the larger ones are investing into data lakes, for example, where the idea is really to have a central storage of everything when it comes to data, structured data, think of it like CSV files from your Excel, or something like that, databases, API sets, and so on, unstructured data, videos, PDFs, invoices that we send to clients, and so on and so on. So everything that is there, putting it in one central place. But at the same time, it raises the big question on how to access that data. And that has gotten a lot better in the last years, also with cloud technology and specific tools for that usage. But it's still nowhere near having a pre-structured way to access this data. It's really messy to work with a data lake in the end of the day. And you really have a very large tech project happening. But what we do see is that there's a way to meet in the middle. Because in a large organization, let's say you're working in the marketing department, you simply most of the time do not get the benefit or what's even sometimes necessary to do a great data-driven marketing in 2021. So you have your tools, and all of these tools have their own small reporting. You have maybe even a dashboarding software like Google Data Studio or one of the others out there to make an automated reporting for you. But what you cannot simply replicate is the whole process about business intelligence. You cannot easily, with a few marketing people, build a BI solution that is doing everything that a BI system usually does and building that single source of truth. But at the same time, you will not find a corporate that doesn't have anything like a data warehouse or so. There's always something. Some of the large organizations have multiple warehouses for different purposes, and that makes a lot of sense. It's not exactly a single source of truth in the end of the day, but it makes a lot of sense. So the question is, what can companies do to, let's say, meet in the middle? Yeah, you don't want to be too dependent on your central data team that is running the corporate data warehouse for a specific region or so. But at the same time, you also want to excel your own game to get better in using data, in my example, in marketing. So what can you do? And there's a very interesting concept that's called multiple versions of truth, or simply speaking, data hubs, as we tend to call them. And the idea is that you have a local domain, like marketing in this case, and you have that marketing data hub built, which is doing all the BI work for marketing with the use of super managed tools like Fivetran, for example, and others that make it very much simple compared to what it used to be from a technical perspective. And we do have clients that have built such a solution almost entirely in their own department. So without too many dependencies on, let's say, the central IT. Of course, you will still need to get the data in there. You will still need to get the data from the other warehouses or the other solutions and get it into your own data hub with whatever solution you want to use for that. But you don't rebuild the logic. There's no value in rebuilding what others have been doing unless it's not fitting. So what you will end up with is a local domain data hub that has all the data that you need and that is connected very well without replication to other existing solutions that you have inside your company, but it's entirely focused on your use cases. And that's the cool thing about it. It is all about marketing in my example. It's doing things like attribution modeling and predictive retargeting of your users and whatever else of cool use cases you can think of. That's all part of this thing. And you would never get that from a central corporate data warehouse because it's not built for this. And if you think that sounds great, but it's hard to believe that it is possible, then I can just encourage you to check out a few of the use cases or the testimonials, that we have out there, for example, for the Ergo Insurance Group or for Deichmann, large shoe retailer. And there have been cases where we have built such solutions and it worked out very, very, very well. And I think it catapulted them definitely to another level. My question to you, Nate, would be, is that something that you also see customers asking Fivetran about? Like not only necessarily doing the central super big monster warehouse for the entire organization, but really a local domain data hub thingy?
Yeah, and I think it depends a lot on the size of company, right? There'll be smaller companies that start out with that central data hub, and that works very well for them. But if you're in a larger organization that has been around for quite a long time, what you don't want is to be held hostage by a central BI team that isn't there to support you. And what's different today is that there are a lot of tools that will allow you to get really incredible results really fast. And so what could have been an impossibility in the past, you can get a pretty good data hub for your particular department really quickly, and it can provide a huge amount of value. So I would say there isn't really a need any longer to be hostage and to not get the answers that are important for you.
I think that metaphor of being hostage is actually quite true in reality, not because the others are the bad guys, but imagine you're working in a central data team, you get requirements from every other team, right? You have a roadmap that is taking forever to complete, and then marketing is coming and tells you, okay, I want these super fancy use cases, but it's only important for marketing. Nobody else would ever care about it. Then, of course, you're not getting, most of the time at least, you're not getting prioritized to be the first one getting what they want, right? And Nate, if we take that even one step further, so far the single source of truth have been deemed to be let's say, an analytics monster almost, like something that you can answer all your questions, and you can find an insight, and then you can translate that with your own experience into the best decision possible. And that, of course, still makes a lot of sense in 2021. But what we haven't touched upon is the automation behind all of this, when we want to use the data for our, let's say, operational purposes. How do we make use of the data getting back? How do we call it activation, right? It's about the idea of pushing the data and also the insights back to the operational source systems. You could also ask technically, is there a way to write back results to the APIs as well?
Yeah, so that's not what Fivetran specializes in. We've specialized in centralizing all the data in the data warehouse, fully automating that, making sure there are no issues. There are companies that do it the other way. So Census is a pretty new startup out of San Francisco, and it's kind of like reverse Fivetran. So then you could use that tool to put the data back into whatever source systems you want. So, I think this industry is exploding right now, and really the companies that best leverage data are going to have a huge competitive advantage going forward. So there are tools that can do that. Yeah.
Cool. Hey, we talked about what needs to be done from a technical perspective. And now my question would be to you, what is a typical stack that you see clients using? So other than using Fivetran in your example, of course.
Yeah. So, there are a lot of great, like a typical stack is that you have your data integration tool, you have your data warehouse, you might have a data modeling tool, and then you have a BI tool. So the most common data warehouses that we work with would be Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks. There's also Redshift. And then in terms of actually modeling the data, there's been a really big explosion of DBT. And so that tool has been used and is really gaining popularity. And then on the BI side, we've worked very heavily with Looker. We use Looker internally at Fivetran. So that's the tool that I'm using. But there's also Tableau, Power BI, Sisense, other tools out there as well that are being used.
And you told me that you guys have an interesting upcoming conference on the stacks that are typically used in the industry. You want to share a bit about that for the audience?
Yeah. So we have a modern data stack conference, and it's really looking at the entire stack, the importance of the data integration tools, the data warehouse, the data modeling, the BI tool, the different consultancies that help you piece it all together, and a lot of customers that are doing companies that are doing incredible things with data. So it's really an opportunity for us all to come together to share the most exciting stories of what's happening, the power of having a complete modern data stack. So we're really excited to support that, and I'm very confident this is going to be an annual thing that will continue. So keep an eye out for the Modern Data Stack Conference.
Very cool. So you will find the link to that conference also in the comments and the show notes. So if you want to check it out, then I can highly encourage you to give it a try. Hey, Nate, let's do a wrap up of our topic at this time, because it's super complicated. I think it's not the easiest topic on the world because it's super technical on the one side. It's mixing data and local domain thingies like marketing together. But let's try to wrap it up a bit. So we said that the single source of truth is kind of the idea of getting all the relevant, distinct data sets together and bring them in one place to do all kinds of analysis on it. We also said you need to give it a self-service fashion. You need to democratize the data. You need to give everybody access to this one way or the other. What would be your 3 key takeaways in addition to that people should take away from today? So if they remember anything from today, from all the other minutes before, what are the 3 things that you want them to take home?
So first of all, if you're a business owner, you run a business and you have a BI department that's responsible for supporting you, don't settle. You should be able to explore your data easily. You shouldn't need to know any special skills like SQL, and you should be able to answer the questions that are most important to you. And this data model will help you do that. And then I think if you're on the BI seat, if you're an analyst or head of BI, please make all the dashboards that you build incredibly explorable. They should be a door into answering a lot of questions. And you're going to be much happier if instead of every single question you have business people coming to you and saying, hey, answer this, that they can just explore it on their own and they can figure it out. And it'll, everybody will be happier and the value you'll provide to the organization will be much greater.
I'm so much with you on that. I couldn't really agree more. Hey, Nate, That was an amazing topic for today. Let us come to an end with asking you a few more rather personal questions, if I may. I was wondering, given that you have been traveling the world, that you've worked in different countries, and that you're super international team at Fivetran as well, I was wondering, what are the values that have guided you across your career?
Yeah, I think for me, from the core, it's really trying to add value and solve a problem. Like for the first 8 months that I was at Fivetran, I was dealing with all the new customers, and I was just, I'd have engineer on one side and the customer on the other, and just trying to solve problems, make things work. And then now that we're here in EMEA serving the European market, the real focus is let's really support our customers. Let's make sure we have a good experience for them, and let's really support our people. For me, seeing people that are really happy, that are able to provide value in the work that they do is incredibly important. So I don't know. I think life, when you think too much about yourself, you're going to run into problems. But when you really just care about providing value to others, it guides you pretty well.
Cool. That's very well said. And I think that applies to much more than just business, right? Living just in the pandemic right now, that fits very well here too.
Yeah.
Hey, and one more thing about your job then. How do you stay productive at managing such a large region like EMEA and having a lot of clients and a lot of people working for you at the same time? What is the advice maybe to the audience in keeping the productivity and maybe in the efficient way of working up?
Yeah. Put a huge focus on hiring. You want to hire the absolute best people that you can, and then you want to set them up for as much success as possible. You constantly want everybody in your organization leveling up. If everybody can accomplish more, they can do more, they're incredibly well aligned, they know the direction that they need to go, then your life actually gets easier over time. But if you don't focus on hiring good people and allowing them to level up and to continue to grow, then you're just fighting internal fires, and it's not as much fun.
Yeah, true story. My last guest actually said something like that as well. I asked him what can corporates learn from startups, when he said, let's give power to the people and let them make their own decisions and grow. It will be much better for you as an organization. And that's also very much what we both think here in that case. Hey, Nate, I have one last question. It's a bit special, so let's see what you can find. But I was wondering, what is the purchase of, let's say, €100 or less that made you more happy in life, or it has impacted your life in whatever you want to interpret in this?
A purchase of €100 or less that really impacted my life. That is a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is maybe a plane ticket to see a friend that I haven't seen in a long time. Nice. That really benefits it. What else? A good backpack. I'm so international. I'm traveling everywhere. That has made a big difference to my life. Or just really quality things. I'm kind of living on that boat, for instance. You don't want more stuff. So one belt, but $100 belt, and that's it. To me, that just makes life simpler. You don't need to think about more things, and you can focus on doing your work and providing value and not having stuff. So I'm a big fan of just a few things, but really, really good things.
Nice. That's a good answer. And sorry, it might have been a bit special one, but I really liked what you said, and I think that's also inspiring for some people in the audience, I'm sure. Hey, Nate, looking at time, I think it has been a pleasure to talk to you today, and I think we should wrap up here, because we should also respect people's time in the audience watching this and not taking half of the day for it. And I know you have a lot of meetings coming up as well. So thank you very much for your time today. It was a pleasure talking to you. I think the topic is absolutely amazing for the market. It's really let me say this, hot shit out there. And if you want to know more about Fivetran, then go check out www.fivetran.com. If you want to reach out to Nate, then you will find him on LinkedIn. So just get in touch with him on LinkedIn, or use the official channels on the Fivetran website. And if you want to know more about anything else that has been mentioned today, like the links to the testimonials of the companies that I have mentioned, or again, Fivetran and the Modern Data Stack conference, then you will find them in the comments and the show notes. So once again, Nate, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you all the best for your future growth of Fivetran. It's going very well these days, and I hope it will continue to go very well down the road as well.
Thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure. Much appreciated.
Cool, great. Then let's stay in touch and talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Hey guys, I really enjoyed the conversation today with Nate. Building business intelligence setups, single sources of truth, data hubs, and similar has been a core area of my personal work in the last, I would say, 10 plus years. And I really love this topic because it helps to build a truly data-driven organization for companies. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button and leave me a comment to discuss. If you know somebody else who could be interested in our podcast or episode today, then just forward it to friends or colleagues. It's highly appreciated. There are many more data topics coming up, so make sure to not miss out. Have a great day, and don't forget to disrupt your data to boost the impact data, analytics, and AI have on your business outcome. Ciao.